like I said, I'm excited about talking about light this morning. It's of no coincidence, I don't think, that we ended up on this passage, a passage that is all about the brilliant, beautiful light of Jesus Christ, the light of God, on a particular weekend that celebrates and focuses on darkness. And it is a joy of mine this morning to be able to focus on the light of Christ when the rest of the world is focusing on the darkness of this world. At the beginning of John's Gospel, in chapter 1 and verse number 4, he said these words, "In him was life, and the life was the light of men, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. There was a man sent from God whose name is John. This man came for a witness to bear witness of the light, that all through him might believe. He was not the light, but was sent to bear witness of that light. That was the true light, which gives light to every man coming into the world." 7 times John mentions light in those handful of verses. And the light that he's focusing of, he always has it in capital L here. It is the light of God. It is the person of God. It is Jesus Christ who is the light of heaven. Here at John chapter 8, look at verse number 12. It says, "Then Jesus spoke to them again, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life." Now, just like chapter 7 and verse number 36, it's almost impossible, I would say, to really get the full impact of that statement without seeing it in its historic context. And so like I did back in chapter 7 with verse number 36, I gave you the historic context for that statement. I want to do that again this morning for verse number 12. When Jesus says that I am the light of the world, you have to understand where is he standing when he says it, and what is going on around him when he says it, and what is the significant impact that that statement has on the audience that he's speaking it to. Let me remind you once again that for the last 8 days, Jesus has been in Jerusalem celebrating with all of the Jewish nation a feast called the Feast of the Tabernacles. It's a 7-day long feast with an 8th day of a rest day. And this event, verse number 12, begins on the 8th day. It's later in the day. We saw earlier where Jesus on the 7th day in the morning, when the priest comes to the water and he has the water ceremony, we unpacked all of the meaning behind that. Well, on the 8th day, there's also another celebration that takes place. It begins on the 2nd day of the Feast of Tabernacle and continues all the way to the very end, to the 8th day is when they bring it to a conclusion. And it's called the celebration of light. In the Hebrew tongue, it is called, and I can't pronounce it, I'm gonna attempt here. I'll give it an attempt. Simha Biata Ha Shahi Iva. That was horrible, I'm sure. You probably wouldn't know any different, though. I could have just went with it and you would have said, that sounds right. Well, that was the name of this particular celebration. It took place every evening as the sun was setting. And what that means in English is this. It means the rejoicing at the place of water drawing, which is kind of odd because it doesn't take place at the water place of the water drawing, but it takes place where the water is brought. It takes place in the court of the women there at the tabernacle. It is the grand room. It is the grand court where the vast majority of the people can come into. And as before you get into the court of the men or the court of the priest, there is a doorway, and there are 15 large steps that lead up to that doorway. And those 15 steps is typically where the Levitical priest would come, all of the choir, all of the men who would sing, they would be there on the staircase. All of the priests would walk up the middle of it. The high priest would go to the center. If he had anything to say or do, he would do it at the very top of the staircase. And all of the court was open and visible to that large staircase. It was also right in front of 13 offering plates, I'll call it that. They were basically trumpets that were connected to the ground. And when I say trumpets, they looked more like a shofar. It was kind of like a circular or motioned horn, and they were made out of brass, sometimes gold, and they were where people cast their money in. This is where the widow cast her mite in. And you have the Pharisees, if you remember reading about that in the Gospels, where they loved to throw their money in because they could hear it clinging around on the inside before it drops down under the ground, is where the collection of that money was held at. This is where Jesus is at. This is what the end of this passage tells us. He's standing there. And as you know, in the morning, after the celebration of water, Jesus begins to teach. And he teaches for presumably hours. And the Pharisees bring an adulterous woman before him. He has his conversation with them about that. We talked about that last week. At the end of the day, so this is the end of the 8th day. At the end of the day, it says in verse number 12 that Jesus spoke to them again, saying, I am the light of the world. Now, what is the significance of that at that moment? What is the significance of him saying that he is the light of the world, just as he said earlier that he is the living water? Why is this significant? Well, for over 1,000 years, the nation of Israel has not seen the light of God's glory. The last time, in fact, that they saw it was at the dedication of Solomon's temple, the great temple. And the Shekinah glory of God came and filled the temple. And even before then, they had seen it very rarely. And in fact, the most visible amount of God's Shekinah glory that they had seen was during their time of the Exodus. As they were traveling around for 40 years, God guided them by a pillar of fire, His Shekinah glory, and it would reside over the tabernacle, and it would guide them at night if they were traveling, and there would be a Shekinah glory during the day that would guide them during the daylight, a cloud of His glory. And the nation of Israel has not seen the physical manifestation of God for over 1,000 years. But they long for it, they pray for it, they want it, they desire the presence of God, they desire the light of God, the Shekinah glory of God to come and rest on the temple, which it had never, on this particular temple, had been there. And so what they do is they manufacture it. As we see often in churches today, it's very difficult to see the presence of God in our churches today because they've become so corrupt and so self-centered that they manufacture it with smoke machines and strobe lights and all of the type of entertainment and different things that they do to try to manufacture some type of a zeal, emotion, a feeling. And this is exactly what the nation of Israel is doing. They have to manufacture this type of light. And the way they do it is they built 4 candlesticks. And these, when I say candlesticks, these are large, very large candelabras. And they are 50 cubits in height. So anywhere you could say about 73 to 75 feet tall. Very, very large candlesticks. And at the top of each one of these candlesticks, there are 4 giant bowls of oil. So 16 bowls in total is what you have here. So you have these 16 giant bowls of oil, and inside of these bowls of oil there are wicks that are made from the old garments of the high priest. So as priests throughout year after year wear out their clothing, their underclothing, they would take that material and they would sew it together and they would make giant thick wicks out of it, and that is what would be put into these 4 bowls. And as the sun is setting each night during the Feast of the Tabernacles, they would bring out these very, very large ladders. And the young priests who are serving in the temple at that time would climb to the top with torches in their hands to the top of these candlesticks, and they would light all 16 of those wicks. And when they did that, it would illuminate not only the entire court, which is a very, very large court, it would illuminate the entire area. In fact, the Mishnah tells us that there was no courtyard in all of Jerusalem that was not brightened by the illumination ceremony during the feast. It had to be a sight to see. I can't imagine how big these bowls were or how big the wicks were, but the amount of light that it produced was monumental. And here's what they did at this celebration. The young priest would light the lamps there. The light would go throughout all of the courtyard and throughout all of the Jerusalem area. And all of the people would rejoice. They would shout with joy, and they would begin to sing. And they would sing Psalms 120 through 134, which is the Psalms of Ascent. And they would sing it with happiness, and they would sing it with joy. And then the high priest would do something that you would never see a high priest do, and the other priests would join him. They would do something that the people only got to see once a year. The Mishnah says that they would dance with abandonment. These were very religious men, very astute. They were very somber, and these were the type of men who never did anything out of character. And yet on this particular event, every year, they would go out among the people and they would dance with abandonment. The history tells us that Gamaliel, one of the famous leaders of the Sanhedrin, that he would take 8 torches and that he would, in a kind of a circus form, he would go out among the people and he would juggle the torches high into the air without ever letting them touch each other. And the other priest would dance around him and the high priest would dance and it would just be one big party. And they would do this into the late hours of the night. And they would do this every single night. It was a time of great, great joy. In fact, the Talmud tells us that he who has not beheld the celebration has never seen joy in his life. It was one of the most exciting moments for the Jewish people to be able to come to this celebration, to sing and to shout and to dance and to just enjoy one another's company and to celebrate the light of God, the Shekinah glory of God, the presence and the power of God. And it's at this moment that Jesus again speaks to the nation of Israel. In verse number 12, and he tells them, I am the light of the world. You could say basically what Jesus is saying to the nation is, I am the Shekinah glory of God. I am the pillar of fire that led you through the wilderness. I am the presence of God. I am the power of God. I am the one who protects you. I am the one who leads you. I am the source of truth. I am God. This is another proclamation of Jesus. I am God is what he is telling. In fact, the way he even says it, I am, this is one of 7 times in the Gospel of John that he uses that statement. It's a statement prohibited for Jewish people to use. You don't say I am. That's reserved for God alone to say that. That is what he said at the burning bush with Moses. Who should I tell them is sending me? He said, tell them that I am has sent you. And Jesus says, that burning bush, that fire, that light, that glory, I am that person. I'm the person who was speaking to Moses. I'm the person who was leading the nation of Israel through the wilderness. I'm the person who came down and resided over the Holy of Holies. I am the person who came and filled the temple with the glory of God. I am the light of heaven. But he doesn't just say that. He says, I am the light of the world. Not just of the Jewish people, not just of those that are gathered around for that particular feast. Jesus says, I am the one who is the God, who is the light, who is the source of salvation and truth and guidance and power and protection. I am that God for all of the world, thus fulfilling all kinds of prophecies. Particularly from the book of Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 9, verse number 1 says this, in Galilee of the Gentiles, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them a light has shined. This is the same chapter that we're all familiar with. It says, for unto us a child is born. This is prophetically speaking to Jesus. A child is born to us. A Messiah is given to us. And he will be a light to the Gentiles. He will be a light to those in Galilee. And you remember all week long they have been complaining, can anything good come out of Galilee? Is there any light in Galilee? And Jesus says, yes. Isaiah said there would be, and that is me. I've been telling you this. In Isaiah chapter 60 and verse number 1, the prophet says, arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen among you. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and deep darkness the people. But the Lord will arise among you, and his glory will be seen upon you. The sun shall no longer be your light by day, nor by brightness shall the moon give you light to you. But the Lord will be to you an everlasting light, and your God your glory. That's exactly what we're seeing in this text, by the way. Prophetically being fulfilled 700 years later, when Jesus says there in the temple, all of these things that you've waited for, I'm it. I'm here. In Isaiah 46 and verse number 6, the prophet says, I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness and will hold your hand. I will keep you and give you as a covenant to the people, as a light to the Gentiles. Speaking of the Messiah again. He will be a light to the Gentiles, to the world. In Isaiah 49 and verse number 6, it says, indeed, he says, is it too small a thing that you should be my servant, to rise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the preserved ones of Israel? I will also give you a light to the Gentiles, that you should be my salvation to the ends of the earth. You will be a light to all of the world. You will be a light to the Gentiles. You will be a light to the ends of the earth. You will be a light all the way to Yakima in the year 2022. We even see this in the Gospels. 8 days, incidentally. I didn't even put those two to two together until just now. 8 days after Christ's birth, in Luke chapter number 2, his parents take him to the temple for the dedication, which is what you do on the 8th day. And they meet Simeon there. Simeon, a prophet of God waiting for this day, says in verse number 29, Lord, now you are letting your servant depart in peace according to your word, for my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared before the face of all peoples, a light to bring revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of your people Israel. I think it's of no coincidence that that took place on the 8th day. And then Jesus, when he pronounces that he is the Messiah, the God, the King, and the light of the world, he does it on the 8th day of the ceremony. Over there in John 8, look at verse 12 again. Jesus not only says, I am the light of the world, he says, he who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. Anyone who believes in him, anyone who follows him, pursues him, trusts him, puts their faith in him, they'll not live in the darkness of this world, but they'll have the light, the truth of God in heaven. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to pause there. There's so much I'd like to read all the way to verse number 20, but I don't think there's time this morning. I'm going to end here, and I think it's appropriate that I end here. It's very clear to me our world is in darkness. It is very clear to me that society is in a very, very dark, bleak, depraved state. And just like in Jesus' day, when it was a very dark time for society, he is the one who brought light to the first generation. He is the one who brought light to those individuals who transformed the darkness, who transformed the heart. And even though Satan tried to extinguish it, even though he tried to murder and kill all of the prophets, and he tried to kill off the church, and he tried to extinguish all those who were followers of Christ, he could not extinguish the light. The light continued to shine, it continued to spread, it continued to grow, because anyone who walks in the light of Christ will never walk in darkness again. And maybe you've been walking for years in darkness, and the darkness has brought you no happiness, it's brought you no joy. You find yourself this morning depleted of any sense of happiness whatsoever, no purpose, no ambitions, no agenda, no goal for life, and depressed. This is a time to cry out to him, the light of the world, and say, would you light up my soul? Would you open my eyes? Would you remove the darkness in me? And would you be my Savior?